Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. We are here on behalf of the Fast Action for Climate to ensure intergenerational justice, or FACE. Here with the World's Youth for Climate Justice and the Normandy Chair for Peace to give a little bit of background on an upcoming advisory opinion request before the International Court of Justice, and just to talk a little bit about how youth can be more involved in the AO process and how advisory opinions can advance intergenerational justice for the climate. So I will turn it over to Trina then to give a little bit of background on the webinar and on our organization.
Thanks, Erica. Hi, everyone. Just for a quick background, this webinar is part of the 12-hour global dialogue on the Power Advisory Opinion. This webinar is hosted by FACE Intergenerational Justice, which is an initiative focusing on the intersection of climate and environmental justice as it relates to fast action or near-term climate mitigation strategies to preserve the planet for future generations. So we encourage youth-led, inclusive, and intersectional discussions on climate change mitigation, resilience, and adaptation. And the focus of this panel will discuss and explore the power of advisory opinions in the context of the climate emergency. And we want to empower young people with the scientific and policy knowledge base to inform further climate action. So I'll bring it back to Erica now, who can go over the run of show.
Yep, so as Trina mentioned, first we're going to go through the scientific background on the need for speed and climate mitigation. Then we'll give a short background on the current advisory opinion requests before international tribunals. And then we'll have a panel discussion for panelists to give their insight on the process, on advisory opinions generally, and on how they can relate to youth movements. And then we'll have an interactive panel discussion and some Q&A. If you have questions, please pop them into the chat and we will be sure to get to them at the end of the session. I will pass it back to Trina then, who will speak on fast mitigation strategies under the climate emergency.
Sounds good. All right, hi everyone. My name is Trina. My pronouns are she, they. I am a founding co-chair of FACE Intergenerational Justice. And I'm also a research associate at the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development, as well as a JD candidate at the Vermont Law and Graduate School, where I'm on the board of the Environmental Law Society and a member of the Environmental Justice Law Society. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background on the need for speed in meeting the climate emergency and a little bit more of the background on the science. So climate change is a threat multiplier that threatens all forms of justice. The impacts of warming affect the most vulnerable frontline communities first and worst, but these communities contributed the least to global warming, as we all know. Therefore, all climate solutions have to be centered in climate justice, and it starts with the demand for representation for the most affected people in areas and decision-making spaces, including youth, as well as fast-acting policies, supporting investments, and other solutions like advisory opinions that can immediately address the needs of frontline and historically marginalized communities. We're quickly running out of time to slow warming to avoid accelerating feedback loops and triggering climate tipping points. Passing 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, which could happen by 2030, raises the risk of crossing at least 6 different climate tipping points, which would lead to irreversible changes in our climate system. Each year, climate activists call for urgent action, but the honesty gap between commitments and action continues to grow. Leaders make promises, but binding commitments to real climate solutions continue to be delayed. Current policies in place are projected to result in about 2.8 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century, which would be catastrophic. And even at 1.2 degrees of warming that we see in 2021 and 2022, weather extremes are becoming more frequent and more severe. The time is running short as we're facing 2 climate crises, one with immediate near-term risks and the other where the risks are delayed but more drastic. The good news is we know what needs to be done. If we can win what we call the sprint to cut short-lived superpollutants like methane In this decade, we can avoid up to 0.6 degrees Celsius of warming by 2050, reduce projected warming in our critical Arctic by 2/3, and the rate of global warming by half. This is the only way to slow warming in the near term, buying us time to decarbonize, adapt, and build resilience to climate change. Superpollutants include methane, tropospheric ozone like smog, black carbon soot, and hydrofluorocarbons that are used primarily as refrigerants. And they all have a stronger warming power than carbon dioxide, but only stay in the atmosphere for an average of days to years. Since superpollutants can also be air pollutants, focusing on these superpollutants have a near-term benefit on human health. And this means reducing them has both an immediate impact on the rate of warming and on local health, which becomes a key climate justice strategy. So these climate solutions must include both a longer-term climate stabilization by reaching 2050 net zero carbon dioxide targets and focus on reducing near-term risks that would trigger a domino effect of irreversible tipping points. So this is what we call the longer marathon to 2050 and the shorter sprint to 2030 through SLCP. And these strategies are complementary, not exchangeable. We have to be able to do both. According to the IPCC, keeping the planet livable requires both of these solutions as well. For small island nations, cutting superpollutants to slow the rate of sea level rise is a survival strategy. Frontline communities need climate solutions today. Young people know that the window for climate action is quickly closing. And this initiative for an advisory opinion on climate change in the International Court of Justice was revitalized by 27 Pacific Islands law students who built upon Palau's 2011 ICJAO campaign to focus on human rights and climate change. These law students formed the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change. And today, the campaign has grown beyond the Pacific, united under the World Youth for Climate Justice. This campaign, led by youth, empowered other young people to demand climate action in the highest court. So with rising calls to act quickly to avoid hitting the 1.5 Celsius guardrail, lawyers and advocates are becoming more creative in using the law to enforce strong and fast climate action centered in environmental and human rights. While the legal system may be seen as a slow-moving solution to the fast-moving problem of a rapidly warming planet, it is possible to achieve climate justice in parallel with fast mitigation strategies to reduce warming as quickly as possible. The courts are not a monolith. They can listen and adapt. And legal strategies, along with activism and advocacy, has the power to implement strong climate action to keep our planet and people safe. So now I'll pass on the mic to Erica, who can speak further on current advisory opinions that are before international courts and tribunals.
Hello, I am Erica Gerstenberger. My pronouns are she, her, and I am in the United States. I am an attorney licensed in New York State, and currently I'm working as a legal fellow for the Institute of Governance and Sustainable Development in Washington, D.C., supporting a global climate litigation portfolio. And first, before we dive into the specific pending requests, I was going to give a quick overview of advisory opinions generally, particularly for the non-legal audience. These are generally non-binding analyses by a court or another tribunal that interpret questions of law not specific to litigating parties. So what they are not judgments to bind specific parties that are on an active dispute before the court or tribunal that's issuing the advisory opinions. They are thus advisory. So they allow a court or a tribunal then to opine on very broadly applicable questions of law, which is a strong benefit of this particular tool. Even though they're non-binding, these are very valuable opinions because they can guide other courts and tribunals. They can be used as tools for diplomacy for states with peacekeeping mechanism. And they also, to some degree, forecast how the court or tribunal itself would rule if it were faced with contentious litigation on the same topic. In the international context, parties request advisory opinions to interpret treaties and other multi and bilateral agreements between states, or also to provide guidance for states to interpret how and whether their own domestic laws comply with these kinds of agreements. And increasingly, and currently, we are seeing advisory opinions being used to strengthen climate action in the courts by seeking to get guidance on states' obligations pertaining to climate change, as Trina mentioned, particularly with the intersection of human rights and intergenerational rights. And so then a little bit of background on pending advisory opinion requests in international tribunals. We'll start with the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. This is the reason we're all here to talk about the subject. There is a campaign currently before the International Court of Justice, which is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. The request was submitted by the Republic of Vanuatu in November of this past year, joined by several other states, urging the United Nations General Assembly to seek an advisory opinion on climate change and intergenerational human rights. The General Assembly is going to be voting on whether or not to proceed with the advisory opinion request on March 29th, just in 2.5 weeks. And we will give some more information later on in the webinar about how to engage in that process and how to urge your states to join on as co-sponsors if they have not already. Another pending request is before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which is the principal organ overseeing the Americas and Latin America. And the request was submitted in January of this year. It was co-submitted by the presidents of Chile and Colombia, which is the first time that sitting presidents have ever issued a joint request before this tribunal. And that, in my opinion, makes it a very, very big, very precedent-setting historic moment just in and of itself. The request is asking, again, for clarification on states' duties under human rights law on whether and how the states must protect present and future generations from the effects of climate change. And then finally, there is also a request currently pending before the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, which is responsible for interpreting questions of law related to maritime and shipping and ocean bodies, water bodies under the UNCLOS, which is the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea. This request was submitted in December of this past year by the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change, and it is asking for an advisory opinion from the court on states' responsibilities regarding climate change's effect on coastal communities and the marine environment. And so to dive a little bit further into advisory opinions, we will next hear from Professor Nicholas A. Robinson. Professor Robinson has extensive experience in international environmental law. I apologize. I'm being told then that we will be switching the order. So on Professor Robinson, rather, we will be hearing from Nimija Nagareddy. And Himija is the proud daughter of South Indian immigrants, currently serving as a health equity research fellow at the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry at the Center for Disease Control in the United States. She is an elected select board member for her town of Acton, Massachusetts. And as one of the youngest elected representatives in her state, she is very dedicated to building youth civic representation in her community and country. Himija recently graduated with a Master of Science in Environmental Epidemiology with a concentration in infectious disease epidemiology from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She is a passionate member of the UNA USA for the last 6 years, founding the first collegiate UNA chapter in Connecticut at the University of Connecticut and going on to serve 2 terms as the Northeast representative on the UNA USA National Council. In her role as youth observer at the UN this year, she strives to uplift voices and actions of young people across our country in a global policy dialogue on international issues of paramount importance. We are very excited to hear from you, Himija, on how you can advocate for advisory opinions, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for the invitation to speak about why youth advocacy with advisory opinions is so paramount. And I apologize if any background noise comes in, but hopefully it is okay. So I wanted to start with a general question. We already kind of heard an overview of what are advisory opinions. And for those who don't know, similar to myself, when I first heard about them, advisory opinions are provided by the courts, such as the International Court of Justice, as we've heard, in response to a legal question. An advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, for example, is sent to the UN General Assembly, UN Security Council, and UN specialized agencies. Advisory opinions are opinions that are advisory. In other words, unlike court judgments, they're not officially binding. But they do have meaning and they do have significance. Court advisory opinions do carry authority and recognition and can be highly persuasive in determining the obligations of states and other entities. So why do advisory opinions matter in the climate justice movement, specifically the youth climate justice movement? Advisory opinions on addressing climate change as a human right can contribute to global progress on climate justice and intergenerational equity. It helps us take a rights-based approach in addressing the climate crisis at all levels, from the local to the international, when dealing with mitigation, adaptation, loss and damages, a lot of things that for many young people who even went to COP27 heard a lot about, and spearheading implementation efforts with the Paris Agreement and the passing of future international climate policy. So we can see that this type of rights-based approach provides a sustainable way of getting everyone on the same page when it comes to climate action. Advisory opinions can also allow us to legally endorse the available science and scientific consensus on climate change, especially in this era of myth and disinformation, especially when it comes to climate education and science. This allows us to establish a basis and a recognition, a legal recognition of the climate science and get, again, everyone on the same page with that to then create evidence-driven implementation efforts. It also, advisory opinions also allow us to transition towards a sustainable economic model and can provide a meaningful way for civil society and the will of the people, such as you and I, especially young people, to hold their governments accountable for protecting their citizens, something that allows us to protect our human rights. And so again, this rights-based approach is really key. Advisory opinions at the international level, and I want to underscore, even at the local level, provide an incredible pathway for young people like us to legally justify and tangibly mobilize area-wide and, importantly, multi-sectoral resources. And you don't have to have a fancy degree for going forth with passing advisory opinions or supporting the passing of advisory opinions. Right now, advisory opinions are an underutilized tool for creating change among youth activists. And we're hoping to change that with this event. So for all of us young activists on the call, for all who are allies of young people who may not be young, I know that it's not unusual for you to feel the responsibility to step up to the mantle and lead the climate education, policy, and implementation efforts that we need for a more sustainable world. So my ask for you today is to dig a little bit more into advisory opinions. Use and share the resources and the knowledge that we're providing today to seriously consider acting. Actively build support for current advisory opinion requests around climate action and climate crisis recognition, and encourage those around you to do the same. Really provide that educational support and resources and reach out to us, people at Faith, people on this call, all the incredible partners that have come together to put forth this event, because you're not alone in this work. And we do want to hear about and support your efforts in your local communities and your national and international avenues of advocacy, because we all know how powerful youth-led advocacy efforts are with creating that radical global change we need today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Himaja. That was outstanding. And I'm so glad that you were able to join this webinar and speak on such important things and empowering young people to be able to act in front of the climate emergency. So now I'm going to introduce Romina Piccolotti, who is a renowned environmental and human rights expert and activist. Romina is the president of the Center for Human Rights and Environment, which she founded in 1999 to promote human rights and environmental protection. And through CHRE, or SEDA in the Spanish acronym, she established Latin America's first human rights and environmental legal clinic to defend underprivileged and marginalized communities from environmental degradation. Previously, she served as Argentina's environment secretary, where she deepened environmental controls for hundreds of companies, helped shape and create stronger environmental regulatory frameworks, led Argentina to pass the critical forestry law, and ushered in the world's first ever glacier protection law. At IGC, she's also a senior policy analyst, where she works to reduce short-lived climate pollutants and strengthen the Montreal Protocol. So now I'll pass it off to Romina to talk about climate justice in international courts and tribunals. Thank you, Romina.
Yes, thank you, Trina, and thank you, the organizers, FACE, and the Normandy, the Normandy Peace Chair for organizing this seminar, which is extremely important at this moment. So enough has been said about the different kind of advisory opinions. I would like to do a deep dive on the advisory opinion that was requested by Chile and Colombia to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights is different from the International Court of Justice because victims of human rights violations do have a standing before the court. In the contrary, the International Court of Justice is only among states. So from my perspective, and specifically for this seminar, to give a voice of the people on climate is very, very important. So I'm very glad this advisory opinion was submitted before the American Court of Human Rights. More than 25 countries of the Americas have accepted the jurisdiction of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And since 1982, the court has issued around 29 advisory opinions. Advisory opinions in the Inter-American system issued by the court do have clear legal effects, as the court is the highest body that interprets the American Convention of Human Rights. So compliance with the advisory opinions that cannot be separated from the duty of states to comply with the provisions of the American Convention of Human Rights that they have signed and or ratified. One of the principal ways in which a state must guarantee compliance is what is called in law the control of conventionality, or the obligation of states to adopt positive measures to guarantee the rights under the American Convention, including through law reform, policies, NDCs, any kind of administrative norms. And they must do it, adopt it in a way that is compatible with the American Convention of Human Rights. And the Inter-American Court has explicitly held that the control of conventionality must include advisory opinion interpretation. This is why I'm saying that advisory opinions do have very strong legal effects in the context of the Inter-American human rights system and the context of national laws of states in the Americas. This is why you will find in the jurisprudence of many countries, including Costa Rica, Colombia, Mexico, Ecuador, Argentina, etc., that courts explicitly held that advisory opinions are binding and authoritative interpretation of the American Convention. Numerous high-level courts of countries of the Americas have also said that advisory opinions have even highest rank that the Constitution, because these countries have included the Constitution, the American Convention, as part of supranational law. So a very clear example of that, for example, is the advisory opinion 24/17 regarding the right of LGBTQ individuals. Since this advisory opinion, states across America have begun processes to ensure that their civil registries ensure an access to identity documents in line with individuals' gender identity. This is in reaction and to comply with the advisory opinion that the court held on this issue. So going back to climate, as was said here, it was a historic moment where two presidents got together and decide that the court need to give advice to states on how they should tackle, how they can comply with their obligations under the American Convention of Human Rights in the context of the climate emergency. And this is the opening, I think, for the youth movement. What this means? I mean, it means that the court will launch a process that will go through all 2023, beginning with public notification of what will be the questions that the court will be advising on. And we can expect that these questions will include issues that are very important for the youth movement, including how to remain under 1.5, and how climate justice can be done, including actions that will help the world to remain under 1.5. So under this context, after the Inter-American Court will notify publicly about the questions, they will open a window for experts, communities, vulnerable groups, victims to submit their opinions, their submissions, their observations to the court on their area of expertise. And that's the opening for the youth movement. From my perspective, an advisory opinion does not clearly tell the states that to comply with their obligations under the American Convention, they should include fast mitigation strategies is the only way that the court can really guide the states on the concept of climate emergency. Because as what I said at the beginning, here in this call, the only way to remain under 1.5 is by substantially cutting short-lived pollutants and increasing action on other fast mitigation strategies like stopping deforestation and increasing energy efficiency. So if you're serious about the climate emergency, and if you want to tackle the climate emergency in a way that respects human rights obligation and includes climate justice, every NDC, every action that you do on climate, every law that you adopt at the national level must be aligned with remaining under 1.5, and therefore must be aligned with increasing action on fast mitigation strategies. So I will stop there and will answer any questions concerning this matter. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Romina. We will now head to the panel discussion. And so I will ask all the panelists to turn on their cameras again. The panelists will include Romina, Himaja, Erica, and Nicole Pons from the World Youth for Climate Justice. Just as a quick background, the advisory opinion resolution that is before the International Court of Justice currently has 105 member states that have co-sponsored the resolution. So I'm about to share the screen right here. You can see the countries that have co-sponsored the resolution, and co-sponsorship is still open. So if you don't see your country flag here, you can call on your government to vote yes on the ICJAO resolution. We'll also be sharing a toolkit and some other information after this webinar that can provide some more information on the science and the policy actions that we can all take, especially youth. For now, I will ask the audience if they could help us out by filling out a word cloud. So Erica will fill in the chat with the link. But for now, I am going to share my screen. And the question that we ask for the audience is, what are a few words that come to mind when you think of intergenerational climate justice? We want to engage the audience and ask them to be able to inform what are the priorities that we can ask for in an advisory opinion and any other legal or policy-oriented climate action. So I'm about to share my screen right now. Perfect. So if you go to the link, you can fill in a couple of words that can that you are thinking of. You can also go to menti.com and use the code that appears on the screen right there. And so we'll give it a few minutes for the screen to populate. And I also invite the panelists to fill this out as well. All right, this is fantastic. Thank you everyone for filling this out. I'm going to keep this kind of open so the panelists can all see some of the priorities or concepts that come to mind when we're talking about intergenerational climate justice. And I'll ask a couple of questions now to the panelists. How can we incorporate some of these priorities into advisory opinions and other legal mechanisms? So I'll leave the floor open right now.
All right. May I come in, Trina?
Of course.
So I see the center fast action, and I could not agree more. I mean, you cannot have climate justice without fast action, because it's the only thing that will. And fast, when we meet, what is fast action? Fast action is to significantly reduce methane emissions, to significantly reduce black carbon emissions, to increase energy efficiency, to accelerate the implementation of FIDALI, which is basically phasing down HFCs for refrigerant, tapping the refrigerators in the cars, and replace it for a kind of friendly refrigerant, and obviously increase energy efficiency. So these are the fast action. Fast action is not necessary to accelerate the energy transition, because if you only accelerate the energy transition, you will end up with more warming that we have today, and that's climate injustice. So while you accelerate the energy transition, you must cut short-lived thermal pollutants and include other fire mitigation strategy to be able to deliver climate justice. And how do you do that in the context of the advisory opinion? First, please contact Trina. She can be the link between us on we're advising right now submissions to the advisory opinion on the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. So if you are willing and you want to submit your views to the court, please contact Trina and we'll help you to do so. So I hope this will be helpful for the next steps.
Wonderful. Thank you, Romina. And I did just share both the emails for my personal, but also the Faith Intergenerational Justice email. And we'll provide some more information through FACE because this is one of the big aspects of the work that we're doing. Before I go to the next question, I just wanted to see if Himaja, Erica, or Nicole has anything else they wanted to say. All right. Oh, Nicole.
Oh, none on my end. I think that was on point, and I actually wrote down fast action, so I agree very much.
Yes, fast action is very important. I think that's part of the science base that we have to inform ourselves to, and making the climate science a lot more accessible and understandable and to people of all ages as well. And I think that's one of the really important things to inform policy recommendations and actions that young people can do. So I'm going to bring this to Erica, Himaja, and Nicole. But I want to ask, why are advisory opinions so important for young climate advocates?
I can chime in first. I think that advisory opinions provide a really incredible way for young people to enter the legal climate justice space, to provide actual input on a level on how we should be approaching holding ourselves accountable, whether we're talking at the local level, state level, or as a globe. How do we keep ourselves accountable to moving towards a more climate just future? And young people have been leading this change. So much of the advocacy that we see in the climate space, honestly, so much of the action that we've seen in this past decade on climate action has primarily been spearheaded by young people. It's been absolutely incredible to see how we've continued to lead a global movement, one that isn't losing momentum, but gaining momentum on creating the fast action that we need. And advisory opinions provide another really substantial avenue for young people to do so. But you're right, there is an educational threshold, or it seems like there's an educational threshold. Many young people don't know what advisory opinions are. I didn't know what advisory opinions are. And it took that education on my end and the resources that FACE was able to provide me for me to learn more about it and to see the potential of contributing to it, of throwing my hat and putting forth my opinion. And so I think that it's a really powerful tool for young people, but it's absolutely critical that we continue to talk about this. The other thing is young people truly are some of the greatest climate educators that we've seen in the world when it comes to talking about the science, when it comes to implementing the action. And so this really does almost feel like a natural fit in the youth climate justice movement, which makes it really exciting. I think that this is another incredible avenue for us to continue to create that change that we need. And also, I want to make reference to what Romina said before about intersectionality and making sure that with the efforts that we're doing, we're really prioritizing the voices that tend to be marginalized and left out of climate advocacy spaces, legal spaces. This is a way for us as youth activists to make substantial steps towards creating a more inclusive advocacy movement, a legal advocacy movement that's pro addressing the climate crisis.
I'll help on that question also. So I think that, I mean, to start, advisory opinions are incredibly important for the youth climate movement because of the need for fast action. Like Trina was saying, if we do not act now in the sprint toward 2030, then our chances of crashing through the 1.5 guardrail are astronomical. And so then to bring it back to what Hima just said, one of the important aspects of the youth climate movement is how good youth are at communicating, spreading the word. And so advisory opinions are a fantastic way just to stimulate the conversation, spread a little bit more the science and the message of the urgent need to act on climate. And also, I think the reason why this particular legal instrument is useful for the youth movement is the nature of advisory opinions as general, broadly applicable questions of law. So rather than an opinion or a judgment that's strictly about party A or party B, an advisory opinion is about you and about me and about everybody that opinion touches. So it makes it a much more, personal connection to the movement for youth who are wanting to get involved in these kinds of campaigns.
Well, brilliant insights from Imogen and Erica. Yeah, just to add a bit to that, even just this 12-hour interregional dialogue, to quote one of the panelists earlier, only the youth has the audacity to organize something like this. And we're all young people, youth groups organizing this in a different regions. So that alone brought us all together. And it just, emphasizing that there's not one solution, and the advisory opinion is not one solution, one instrument that will wish away all the problems of the climate emergency, but we have to parallel that with efforts like what Romina and Imogen saying with fast action and keeping it at 1.5. And we need to reinforce this discussion, especially leading up to the AO. And hopefully when we get the vote at the United Nations and then we go to the ICJ, that these conversations and these issues are included as well and are part of the discussion and hopefully will be addressed as well. And and I think just also the fact that an advisory opinion was framed, this advisory opinion on climate change and human rights was framed by the Vanuatu government, who's the leader of this, who's the main sponsor of this resolution, as a youth advisory opinion. I don't think something like this has been as inclusive to the youth. I mean, an instrument of international law. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's just incredible to me that even the states are recognizing it as a youth advisory opinion, mainly led and campaigned for by youth. So it's a very empowering story and something that not only youth from all backgrounds can contribute, not just those with legal background, because imagine I'm a lawyer now. I started as a law student. I didn't even know what an advisory opinion was. So that's why we had these discussions with Trina when we were planning all this, that we wanted to be as accessible as possible and to ground it and to contextualize it, like what will it do and what does it mean, and not just and go beyond the technicalities of it. And that's also why we're doing that, and we're seeing more and more people getting involved, getting educated, being more aware. And yeah, that's also very inspiring as a youth advocate myself.
Thank you so much for all of that. Romina, I just see that you unmuted. Did you want to say something as well?
Right. I want to point out there are two specific questions also that I think are relevant for in the Inter-American Human Rights Court advisory opinion request. One has to do with the differentiate obligations of the states to protect children. And so as one of the most vulnerable groups under the climate, on the context of the climate emergency. So I think that's a very good opening for the youth movement as well. You know, you can make a submission on 1.5, 60 pinpoints if you don't include fast mitigation strategy and increase funding and policies and actions behind fast mitigation strategy. Then you can do a submission specifically on the vulnerability of children, the context of climate emergency, and what does it mean for climate justice. And again, reiterate the fast mitigation strategy. And then there is another question that has to do with judicial remedy. And I think that's a very important question. First, because environmental defenders, climate defenders are being killed, are being harassed around the world. And it seems that the judiciary system is built not to protect the freedom of expression and from the youth movement at this moment. So I think it's very important that the court, including this advisory opinion, when they answer this question of the states, what does it mean to provide a judicial remedy in the context of the climate emergency? It must be fast, a fast judicial remedy first. And second, it must allow the protection of the freedom of expression, which include, in my view, civil disobedience too. So I think that's another specific question that is very close to what the youth movement is doing and the protests on the streets, etc. How to protect that, how to ensure that the law protect that rather than suppress that, and the judiciary as a key implementer of the law.
Thank you, Romina. And thank you everyone else as well. And this kind of makes me think of another question when we are discussing, remedies or what kind of actions that we can demand for, or what young people actually need. Who will be drafting this? Who can write, these opinions, these policies, anything like that? Is there the space for young people to be able to comment? And if so, are those comments even incorporated? How do we avoid the tokenization of youth, just as, oh, great job, young people are advocating for this, and kind of keeping it at that? We need to actually, be empowered. And so how can young people go about doing this in the very intimidating legal institutions and policy institutions that often just tokenizes young people, and there is not an actual space for young people to wield more influence and power in those decision-making spaces? This is an open question. I'm sorry, it's a big question, but.
I mean, just to jump on it very quickly, there needs to be more seats at the table for youth in decision-making capacities on the kinds of organizations and institutions that are making these decisions. Like Himija, we need more of you. We need more participation. And I also just wanted to underscore what Romina was saying about judicial remedies, and perhaps, Trina, then remedies can be incorporating direct action to include youth more meaningfully. But these opinions, these advisory opinions, are going to be very beneficial, because not only are we asking for more definition on what the duty of states is, what do they actually have to do, it'll also, indicate when has that duty been breached, when has the law been broken, and then further, the remedies part, what do you have to do about it once the law has been broken? And I think that that's just a fantastic opportunity now with these conversations to try to be thinking about how we can better integrate youth into each one of those steps.
I totally second you, Erica. I think that it's so important that we continue to encourage more young people in this space, especially informal delegations, formal delegations to UN conferences, in negotiation spaces, formal delegates to, you know, our missions, our UN missions around the world. And I think that we're making steps towards that, but there's so much more that we can do, exactly like you said. And I think that that has so much value, because I mean, we even just saw the list of countries that have signed on to this AO, and there were so many that were missing, including the US, I believe. And so one of the things that we can continue to do is make sure we have young people in these spaces, at, as you said, Erica, these seats at the decision-making tables. And the responsibility, you know, oftentimes falls on youth activists to try to push for those seats. And I would challenge people on this call who are youth allies and may not be young people themselves, but care about youth engagement and care about hearing from the young people who are on the front lines of this climate crisis, to really make sure their voices, their perspectives are incorporated, because they have actual power in these spaces.
Just to quickly add to that too as well, I'd just like to share one story testimonial from a friend, a colleague here in France. I think what we are able to do is, because we are encouraging youth and young people to converse and reach out to their governments, we're empowering them as well. So what happened was that they reached out to their ambassador, French ambassador, and then the French ambassador was so surprised that young people, 20, 21, knew exactly what they were talking about. And they were kind of being quizzed, because this ambassador, this diplomat, wasn't really sure if they knew what they were talking about. But then because of these, because of how these groups that we have, the FACE, for example, with your awareness and education program, and World Youth for Climate Justice, providing toolkits and providing this material. So we're empowering and educating these young people, and that also emboldens them to reach out to their diplomats, and just this encouragement in general to talk to their government, and that this is their right and they can do this. And we've had many experiences like this and stories like this. And yeah, I think that's also one way to make sure that youth have meaningful participation, that they are not afraid to converse with their leaders, which is very important and encouraging. And also one thing that we're working on for the World Youth for Climate Justice is our Youth Climate Justice book. It's like a green book. It was inspired by the Yale brief. So many students from different universities are contributing and writing to that. And we're planning to submit it to the proceedings and show this. And I'm not sure if that's possible, but I don't know, with the ICJ proceedings later on, with the yeah, maybe we can submit that, or whoever's willing to listen and read this, that this was put together by young people from different universities from all over the world. So, you know, I think that's one thing, one example of meaningful participation.
Nicole, I would like to read that. If you can please send that to me, and see if from that we can convert it in a submission to be inside the Inter-American process. I think will be very interesting. I would like to read it first. So please send that to me.
Yes,
great effort. Thank you. Very, very good effort. And yes, I do believe that, you know, the youth movement needs to be at the table, and we're doing everything that we can to get you guys at the table. We should have done that a long time ago. And what I mean at the table is at the decision-making table, because you can be part of a delegation, but not be at the decision-making table, you see? So you need to be very specific on your ask. I think that will also bring more transparency to the process and more accountability to the process, which is essential. I mean, there are many things that happen during these negotiations that I always think, you know, if these things come out in a transparent way, and you are held accountable in your own country of what you're saying here in this negotiation table, then you will be behaving in a different manner, you see? So today there's no accountability at all during the negotiations. And I think this is a very, very important point, and that the use through the social media, etc., can really help on that.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Oh, Nicole, did you want to say anything else?
I just wanted to say that thank you, Romina, and we would love to share that from the World Youth for Climate Justice.
Wonderful.
Great. And I really hope you make a submission in addition to this green book that you have put together, that you make a specific submission on climate justice and the climate emergency and fast mitigation and tipping points. I think this is essential. And the advisory opinion is also a good tool to educate judges, to educate lawyers, to educate communities that are beyond these scientific discussions. And we should use that, amplify that. We're going to organize 2 regional workshops, one in maybe Amazonia and the other in Colombia. We'll let you know about that. And after the submission process is closed by the court, there will be a hearing where different experts will have their date in court, if you wish, but they will be speaking to the court. And I think it's very important to promote that and push the court to be progressive, which I'm sure it will be. The women at the court, women are always progressive. And then on the ICJ process, anything that we can do to help, we're willing to. Any information maybe from this process that can help the other process could be useful. You will need to keep a lot of pressure on the ICJ. I have litigated in the ICJ myself to make sure that they come out with a good advice for opinion on a progressive one.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I am cognizant that we have a little bit of time left, and so I want to be sure to incorporate some of the Q&A. So if you haven't filled out the Q&A, feel free to fill it out below, or just send me a direct note and I can ask the questions to the panelists. But the first question that I see is, how do other human rights conventions interact with ICJAO, and how are future generations considered? So I'll leave this open as well.
Sorry, Trina, can you repeat the question? I couldn't hear it very well.
No worries. The question was, how do other human rights conventions interact with the ICJAO, and how are future generations considered?
Right. I can tell you how other treaties interact with Inter-American Convention, the American Convention and Inter-American Court first. And for example, both courts, Inter-American Court and the European Court, they look at each other a lot. So you will see, for example, on different jurisprudence from both courts, that they are reflecting also what the other court is doing. We hope that this experience that we're going to have at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights will also influence what the European Court of Human Rights can do and what the African Court of Human Rights can do. And actually, a specific seminar will be held among the 3 courts where the advisory opinion capacity on climate will be addressed by the judges themselves. This is a closed seminar only for the judges and the courts. So hopefully this will inform each other. Now, the ICJ will not will not address the human rights obligations under this regional treaty at all. It's a very different setting. So I'm not sure how this will develop in the future when the ICJ advisory opinion moves forward.
To build off of that response, the jurisdiction of each tribunal is different and specific to those tribunals, but like she mentioned, they communicate with each other and they look to each other. And they, it's one of the great facets of an advisory opinion is because it's a guidance document from that tribunal, other tribunals can look to it and see how it would apply to the laws within their respective jurisdictions. And so also wanted to add and emphasize something that Romina said, that in addition to the youth needing access to information on fast mitigation science and how they can get involved in the climate emergency, oftentimes legislators, litigators, judges, people who are professionals in the legal space might not have direct interaction with climate law or international climate law regularly, and might not have a lot of the background on the need for speed and the action that we need to take mainly on short-lived climate pollutants in the near term to curb warming in the near term so we can address the climate emergency in time. So events like this and events that, closed events like Romina was describing, or delegations, any way that we can be spreading this information, we need to do so.
Thank you, Erica.
I would also like to share a timeline with you guys. I think it's important. So our expectation is that the advisory opinion will be issued by the court maybe the first quarter of 2024. I say that because, there's a journey through the advisory opinion, and then it's the day after of the advisory opinion. And so you can begin preparing yourself, what will you do with this advisory opinion? What kind of actions will you take? How will you move forward after, the day after?
Yeah, I'll just say also to Erica's earlier point about the education, not even just for young people, but everyone that is working within the climate sphere, parallel to the climate sphere. A lot of the science is very technical, and not everybody reads the IPCC report that is released, every couple of years. However, when we're centering climate justice, the need for speed is already inherent, as we see with youth climate advocates from the Pacific, from small island states as well. And we see that many climate activists are already advocating for policy solutions that do align with the fast mitigation strategy, as we described, with the 1.5 degrees Celsius and short-lived climate pollutants. However, it's not called SLCP mitigation. It might be instead called climate justice or clean air or food security, which focuses on establishing clean air for people and food security for people, but it also reduces emissions of black carbon and methane, which is part of the SLCP strategy. And so being able to link this science background with the policy recommendations, especially for young people, but all people that are working on climate, it's so important to link these ideas together and bring it in the legal field as well too. So then we can define and have, better understood parameters for more efficient or better climate solutions that focus on climate justice. So if anyone has anything else to add, I can leave a little bit of space. And if not, there are a couple more questions that came into the Q&A, so I can go straight to that. All right, so the next one is from Caitlin Frederick. What are high priority areas for youth, not necessarily studying law, but interested in climate change, or uplifting this important initiative in our countries that have yet to support this? And I'll send this in the chat as well.
I can jump into that because I love this question. It's something that we've actually been working a lot on just this year through my term as Youth Observer and even in past Youth Observer efforts. So to summarize, over the past 4 months, I embarked on a nationwide listening tour, going in person and virtually across the country to speak with young people and really gather feedback and information on what youth priorities were. And completely unsurprisingly, I don't think anyone would be surprised by the fact that climate change was the #1 thing that was mentioned in every single discussion that we had, in every single forum that we held. It was a huge priority for young people, and they made it known. And it was really powerful hearing the statements, the personal anecdotes of young people having faced environmental and climate injustices here in the US. Young people reading up about the science and being the main educators of their communities, especially if their communities were a little bit resistant to making meaningful climate education changes, using the science to govern policy, things like that. I would say the top things, and I can actually put the link in the chat for you all to see, but some of the key findings were young people were especially worried about climate and environmental injustice. So how the climate crisis disproportionately affects people of color, people who live on the coast, people who are of low income, people who are of the LGBTQ+ community. There's so many different groups that climate change disproportionately affect when it comes to, and you can list all the other 16 SDGs, health and well-being, quality education, and the list goes on. So that was the key thing that came out of the listening tour. Other things that came out include seeing stronger US commitments to addressing the climate crisis from an economic standpoint, from a policy standpoint, and even at the state and local levels, making sure that there were substantial improvements to actually moving forward with the climate future. More than happy to put that in the chat. Those were just a few things that were highlighted. But the other thing that we wanted to do, especially when talking about the climate crisis, was highlight more Indigenous voices. Indigenous people are at the forefront of facing huge losses due to the climate crisis, and oftentimes have been at the forefront of championing the actions that we need to be taking towards conservation, towards energy efficiency. So it was really inspiring hearing from our Indigenous community as well on that. So I'll put that in the chat so that you can all take a look if you're interested.
If I could add a high priority action item, I think a lack of knowledge and a feeling of imminent doom has led to a lot of paralysis by people who otherwise would be keen to participate in the climate action movement toward solving the climate emergency. So I would say also hop on social media, spread the word as make the science and make the message accessible, that there is hope, that there are pathways to be able to reduce warming in the near term. We know how to do it. We have the science, we have the available tools. There's no reason not to be doing it right now. So hop on social media, tell your friends, and get the conversation going.
Yeah, those are great points. And just to add to that as well, I think, I think that the thing with climate change, that's why it's so difficult to address, is that it doesn't come in one shape. It's all shapes and sizes, and it affects so many facets of things. And also, it's not some apocalyptic thing like don't look up, like an asteroid going to destroy the world in a day or two. It's something gradual that affects all of us, but it's difficult to see and visualize. So I think one way to a high priority action as well would be to amplify the voices of vulnerable communities who are affected by this, hugely affected by this, but we don't see that often by the effects of climate change, because again, it comes in all shapes and sizes. So one of the ways to do that is to storytelling and evidence collection and showing how it affects communities and vulnerable communities. So it doesn't stop at all to those who have legal backgrounds. We have to engage people and youth who are working on the ground and in their communities and empower them as well.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and everyone as well. That was extremely inspiring. And before we hop off, this reminds me of one of my favorite Venn diagrams of all time, which I shall share on the screen now. But this is from All We Can Say, and about climate action that we can take part in and how we can figure out what we can do when things seem so overwhelming. So the Venn diagram intersects what brings us joy, what is the work that needs doing, and what are you good at? And combining these three elements into concrete action for the climate based on your level of ability, your knowledge, your experience, your lived experience and everything is critical for us to combine our efforts and create a growing movement, such as with the ICJAO resolution movement that we see has grown to be so big. And I also want to say the joy element is also really important too, especially when you're fighting climate anxiety, because I think being joyful is one of the most radical things we can be, especially in the face of just such scary uncertainty. And the thing is, the solutions are out there, that we can do the solutions. We just have to act now. Hope is not lost. And we see this with all the young people that know this and are working on this today. And I think it's very important. So I can leave this Venn diagram open for everybody. And I want to thank everyone for joining this webinar, and thank you so much to Nicole and to everyone at the World's Youth for Climate Justice, the Normandy Chair for Peace, with Ariel that helped organize this conference that was so helpful and so important in discussing the power advisory opinions and other things that young people and all people can do to achieve climate justice in the near term and the long term.